So I just want to make it clear to everyone that we are going to record it. So anything they say might be taken down in the recording. So please be warned. But I think it's very useful to record this webinar because we can make the information available through other media outlets, and I think that would be very good for this piece of work. And as we advertised on the Eventbrite advertisement, we are currently working on a strategy to increase the use of mobile apps to support the mission of the Pistoia Alliance, which is to lower the barriers to innovation in life science R&D. And Alex is going to talk about 3 phases of the app strategy: phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, as indicated there. And the plan is to have about 15 minutes of exposition, but then to have a good Q&A. So it would be really extremely helpful if you could start to formulate your questions, because we're extremely keen to get feedback on this work to inform the future direction of the Pistoia Alliance app strategy. And my last slide before handing over to Alex, I thought you might be interested in this, that we had about 100 registrants through the Eventbrite advertisement, and that captures people's their name and their organization. And so I did a little histogram, or pie chart to be more precise, and you can see at the top of the pie chart 6% dark blue are working in consultancy, then information suppliers or commercial information suppliers 6%, instrument manufacturers 9%, IT companies 11%, and then life science R&D, because it's not just pharma R&D, there are also some other non-pharma life science R&D companies represented in the registration list. 33% and 32% are the software, the commercial software community. So with that little breakdown of the registrants by discipline, what I'll do is to move to the other slide deck, which is the slide deck that Alex is going to talk to, and I'm going to make sure that that Alex can be heard. Alex, are you there?
I am indeed. Hello, everybody.
Very good. So let me pass control over to you, or at least the presentation over to you. And if you say next slide, I will make the next slide come up.
Alrighty. So I'm Alex Clark, and I'm one of the team members who's been working on the details of the app strategy that we're about to go over. And this has been formulated throughout this year, but in the last couple of months we've sort of picked up the pace somewhat. So as John mentioned, we are hopefully recording this session, so these slides will be available with the audio track later on. And this actual presentation will be pretty brief. I only have about a dozen slides, and so just to reiterate, I'd like it if you could think of any of the questions that you have as anything that springs to mind that I didn't clarify or you want to discuss later. Just start typing it into the box or get ready to put your hand up later, and we'll kick off from there. So slide 2, that's good. So as you've probably noticed, if you've been paying attention to mobile apps, in the last few years the number of mobile apps for chemistry and other sciences has grown from basically nothing into a small ecosystem. And as you may recognize some of the icons on this slide, and in fact I strongly suspect that some of you who have actually created these apps are actually listening right now. So the fact of the matter is there are now quite a few companies and individuals and institutions who are interested in producing mobile apps for chemistry and biology and other aspects of life sciences. So the Pistoia Alliance recognizes that mobile apps are going to become increasingly important to life sciences R&D, just like they have in pretty much every other industry and throughout software. And because this particular niche within a niche for life sciences in particular is so young, there are many ways in which the Pistoia Alliance can help nurture it by providing pre-competitive resources, which is a train of thought that's very much in keeping with the goals of the Pistoia Alliance. And one of the main ways in which we can do that is by creating an app store that's dedicated explicitly to life sciences R&D apps. And I'm going to talk about how we're going to do it and what the reasons why we think this will actually help the field. Next slide, please.
Yes, I'll just. Here it comes.
In the next slide, you'll see an overview of the three phases. There we go. So each of these phases is exponentially more ambitious than the one before it. So in phase one, what we attempt to accomplish is relatively modest. We'll be collecting apps that are designed for chemistry or biology, so life sciences R&D type apps, and we'll be taking these from the public app store, so the ones that you're all familiar with, like the iTunes App Store and Google Play and maybe the Microsoft one too. And we'll be listing these apps on our app store, which is, at this point, it's essentially just a catalog. So when you select one of the apps to be installed, it will just send you off to the appropriate platform app store, where the actual app is hosted and delivered to your device. So this is pretty simple conceptually and technically as well. But each of the apps that we list on our App Store will also have a discussion forum that's created, and it will be associated with that app, because phase one is really about bringing together the apps that are relevant to the kinds of things that you're doing and bringing together the app creators and the app users. So that's something that really doesn't happen on the public app stores within a vertical market like the one that we're in. Phase two is somewhat more ambitious because it involves actually hosting the apps themselves on our app stores, which means that app creators will be able to submit their apps directly to our app store, and from there will be able to be delivered directly onto users' devices, which means that it won't be necessary to get the app reviewed and hosted on the public app store where everyone can see it. We can put it directly on the specialized one, and that opens up quite a diverse range of options. So we're quite excited about this. And phase three is even more ambitious still. It involves building a scalable cloud-based infrastructure to give apps the resources that they need in order to work with large data sets and intensive calculations. And I'll talk a little bit about these towards the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. So as you'll see in a moment, we right now have a prototype of the App Store, which looks like the snapshot that you can see. So that's basically what it looks like on an iPad right now. The software is provided by AirWatch, and they've been very helpful, and so we're actively working with them to make sure that their storefront software is capable of delivering all of the features that we need. Well, basically, long story short, it is capable, so that's great. And so we hope to open up the Pistoia App Store in phase one in mid-January, if all goes well. And it'll be available to Pistoia members and non-members alike. And so if you remember, phase one is relatively straightforward because we're just listing apps and providing discussion forums. So next slide, please.
Coming up.
So basically in phase one, all of the apps that we offer will have to be listed already on the standard app store for that device. And so that means the apps will have already been through some kind of a review process, some more rigorous than others. But that takes a lot of pressure off us when it comes to deciding whether or not to actually list apps on our store. So we don't have to check them to make sure that they don't have any malware or crash on loading and that sort of thing. So we limit our review process in this stage to simply deciding whether or not the app is appropriate to the domain. And the criteria is really very simple. The apps, they must be relevant to life sciences R&D. And as I mentioned earlier, that basically means pretty much any app that's designed for chemistry or biology, or is really designed for using in contexts like drug discovery. Anything that is quite clearly designed to help with these kinds of tasks that scientists grapple with day to day is something that we want on the App Store. And we haven't we haven't defined it any more explicitly, because we're pretty sure that in the initial stages we'll know it when we see it, and we're pretty sure that you know it when you see it too. So as we get more experience with the kinds of apps that people submit to the store, we'll probably narrow down the guidelines and make it more clear as to exactly what we want to see and what we don't want. But for right now, it's fairly broadly defined. Apps that are designed to help scientists with life sciences R&D. And so basically, in the initial stages, if we make a mistake, we decide that we listed an app that doesn't really belong there, we'll just take it off. And because in phase 1, that's not really a big problem. We won't uninstall the app or anything. It's just a reference to the public app store. So next slide, please.
On
the
its
next
way.
slide is one of the really, probably the most important thing that we're going to do in phase 1 is creation of discussion forums that are associated with the app. And so one of the problems that you may be familiar with the standard platform app stores is they're really only designed for consumer mass market apps. And so and one of the consequences of this is that customers are basically anonymous. So if you publish an app on the iTunes App Store, you don't actually get to find out who buys it or downloads it. So it's kind of like selling widgets in Walmart. I mean, you only get basic stats on how much you sold and when and what geographical area, but you really don't get to find out who bought it or what they did with it. Sometimes when things go badly wrong, you get to find out, but you actually, in a market like ours, which is a very vertical market, like in pharmaceuticals, that's really orthogonal to the way that we want to deliver these kinds of products. And so what Pistoia wants to accomplish is to get the scientists who create these apps talking to the scientists who use them. And in that way we'll be very actively encouraging users to share their use case stories and also their gripes and ideas ranging from the mundane to the outlandish. Because that's really how software gets better. I mean, that's how we can help these products iterate so people can actually use them for things like discovering drugs, that sort of thing. And this is a need that's it's not only poorly served on the public app stores. There are actually a whole lot of artificial barriers to prevent you from doing this kind of customer relationship building exercises, and so that this is really a key roadblock that's just that's really holding apps back from being useful in these kinds of high value, low throughput markets like life sciences R&D. So if we go to the next slide, the next slide mentions that we'll be organizing a competition at some point. Just waiting for the slide to come up. So we have yet to work out the actual details for how to do this, things like who's going to judge it and what the prizes will be. But we're fairly certain that we want to do this, and we're also fairly sure that the objective is going to be fairly open-ended. So we want people to think about creating apps that, you've heard this phrase before, lowering the barriers to innovation in life sciences R&D. That's the mission goal of Pistoia, and we want people to create apps that that make that goal a little bit closer. And so the take-home message from this slide is that if you have an app that fits in this broad category, or you're building one, or you're thinking about building one, keep an eye on the Pistoia newsletters, because you might just find out that you get an opportunity to submit it into this competition and win whatever the prize happens to be, and we'll certainly do our best to publicize it as well. Next slide, please. So the next slide is going to talk a little about phase 2. And phase 2 is where things get a little bit more technical. So phase 1 is really just listing apps that are already available somewhere else and bringing people together to basically talk about them a bit more. So in phase 2 we will continue to use the AirWatch software to actually, and this time it will have the option of actually hosting the apps themselves, which means that you submit as a vendor, you can submit an app directly to our store, and then once it's approved, we can let users download these apps directly onto their device, and that circumvents the public app stores. And I'm sure it's all occurred to you, some of the obvious advantages of this, and the first bullet point there is the fact that the forfeiting of 30% of your revenue is something that won't happen. We have no interest in getting involved in the actual business transaction, so that particular tax won't exist. And also the review will be handled by us at the Pistoia Alliance, and we like to think that we're much more friendly than the alternatives. And the reason for this is that basically we're scientists, and we want to see apps and science succeed. And so if you submit something that's not quite the way we want it, we're not just going to reject it for some bureaucratic reason. We'll actually start a conversation with you because we want to see this work, and we're really interested in finding out what people are doing and what people want. So some of the other advantages really come from the much greater level of control that we will be able to make available to vendors once we're actually hosting some of the apps ourselves. And one of the really key points here is that as a vendor, you will actually be able to find out who your users are, and that's a really important point. That stands in stark contrast to the standard platform stores, which are, for all effective purposes, they are anonymous to you. You don't get to find out who the people are. And so that takes a wall away. I mean, which would have been fine if it was a mass market, but life sciences R&D certainly is not that. And the ability to establish a customer relationship is really vital to building any kind of business or making your products actually become genuinely helpful. And so finding out who the users are is a kind of a good start to accomplishing this. Because vendors will be able to control who can use their apps and when, the access to the apps can be negotiated offline, which basically means you as a vendor can work out whatever kind of business model you want. Pistoia doesn't try and inject itself in the middle. So it's whatever monetization strategy you want to pursue. It's a bit more like installing software on a normal computer. I mean, you can work out whatever terms you want and try and get that to work. So effectively, we're trying to let you have your cake and eat it too. I mean, we're trying to provide the convenience of app stores that people have come to expect these days, like, you know, just tap on it, install it, and automatic updates, all that kind of good stuff. And with the flexibility that you have when you're selling software directly onto someone's computer. So basically, make the terms as you wish. So in phase 2, slide's already up, good. The AirWatch software will hide most of the technical details for handling the delivery of the apps. This is something that they've already worked out. But that still leaves us with a fair bit of work to do because once we're actually hosting apps for delivering directly to users, we can't rely on any third-party review process because we will be providing them directly. So we have to be a little bit more careful about who we accept apps from and making sure that the apps don't do anything nasty, either accidentally or on purpose. That's a solvable problem, of course, but the big sort of issue that we have to make sure that we get right is just making sure that we have actual permission to deliver apps directly for some of these closed app stores, and I'm thinking in particular of the Apple iTunes App Store. And as you all know, it's a very closed platform, but there are ways to deliver private apps, and so we just have to make sure all of the T's are dotted and the I's are crossed, if you like, and so we can legitimately provide Apple-based apps. The good news is that Android has no such restrictions, so we're totally confident that when we start with phase 2 that we'll be able to deliver Android apps directly. But if things all go well, we'll be able to deliver Apple apps as well, and that's a really big deal because, as you know, the iTunes standard store has some very onerous restrictions in some cases. Next slide, please. So now we're just going to talk very briefly about the phase 3 of the App Store. And so this one's a little bit different. So it's we're working on designing a cloud-based infrastructure which will provide services to mobile apps so that they can make use of large data sets and massively scalable calculations that people normally do using workstations and clusters. And so, although I haven't gone into any detail in this presentation, some of the scientific apps that you can get right now from the standard app stores have become quite sophisticated recently, and they can do some pretty exciting stuff, which might actually surprise you if you haven't looked into it in detail. But one of the things that they really can't do well or at all really is work with large data sets, and especially operating intensive calculations on them. And so mobile apps have some clear restrictions there, but they can be overcome just as long as the suitable services are available. So phase 3 of our App Store, which is running in parallel to the other 2 phases, is the objective is to deploy a single location, a cloud-based service where cheminformatics and bioinformatics algorithms can be deployed, and these can be run from a mobile app or from anywhere else through an API. And these back-end algorithms can have access to large user data sets. And so that's basically a way to remove the bottlenecks and limitations that make it incredibly inconvenient for apps to find ways to make use of large data. And that's one of the things that's really keeping apps confined to a limited niche. So once if we are able to successfully build out this infrastructure and get it all working well, we can really give mobile apps actually a chance to compete quite seriously with some of the workstation-based software that people currently use in life sciences R&D. So that's pretty exciting. It gives us a lot more options. Next slide, please. The next slide shows that we recently had a meeting organized by the TM Forum. We met at their headquarters in New Jersey, and we just included some of the people who showed up and presented some of their work and their ideas. To give you an idea of some of the kinds of companies that are actually interested in participating in building out this cloud-based infrastructure and making mobile apps really become an important part of the life sciences R&D process. So you can see here that if you look through some of the names and the companies in brackets and institutions, it's quite a diverse group of people who sent a representative to this gathering last month. Big companies, small companies, academia, industry, and so a lot of people are really seeing that this whole idea of mobile apps plus cloud computing is really coming of age, or it's about to come of age, and are interested in participating from the beginning. So when it really starts to mature, they'll be well placed to provide useful services and maybe even make a bit of money out of it. It's very early days of phase 3. We're still discussing what we want to build, but we have plenty of ideas on how to put it all together. The good news, I guess, is the technology involved for building out this infrastructure is really it's mature and well established. I mean, it's nothing that different to what people use for all kinds of other purposes. It's just that no one has really sat down and built a single place where you can put all of your back-end algorithms and access through a common API to deliver to mobile apps and life sciences. It doesn't exist because no one's built it. It's not because the technology is new or unknown. So it's just a matter of putting it all together and making it as useful as possible to people in our industry. Next slide, please. So that's basically an overview of the Pistoia Alliance app strategy. I may have gone over time slightly, but we've still got plenty of time for questions. I haven't been watching the question box, so I'm not sure if anyone's typed anything yet. But if any of this triggers something you want to ask, just and you're actually listening to the presentation right now, by all means go for it. If you think of something later on, or if you're listening to the recording, feel free to send an email to me at alex.clark@pistoiaalliance.org, and I'll make sure your question gets answered. And also, if you have an app that's listed on one of the app stores and you think it belongs in the Pistoia App Store, by all means get in touch with us. Just send me an email. And so since we'll be releasing phase 1 in mid-January, all going well, we want to make sure that we cover all of the relevant apps that are in existence right now. So you should start thinking about that if you have something to offer. So with no further ado, we'll see if we have any questions to kick off the discussion.
Alex, thank you very much indeed. And that was an extremely good and clear presentation. And maybe the first thing to do is to ask Ingrid, our domain lead, if she would like to make any comments. Ingrid.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks, Alex. Again, I think the whole concept is really centered around building community and building community globally in the life sciences area, and using this as a way to connect up those who are creative in creating apps, whether they be private or commercial apps, with scientists. And so that's really where we're coming from, and we're really excited about the possibilities. I did have one clarification, and I just want to confirm this with Alex as well. For phase one, where it's really a catalog type of approach, we aren't just going to go out and gather up apps and put them in the store, right? Anyone who has an app needs to really just kind of submit that. So we're not going to go out and just get everybody's app. You really need to put it in there, and that way everybody's on the same page, that you want to be engaged, that you'd like to have discussion forums.
Exactly. Yeah. So I mean, we need the vendors, people who create apps, to actively participate. I think I may have forgotten to mention that the discussion forums that we're putting together, we really do require that the vendors participate. So if you submit an app and we put it on our app store, and people are asking all of these questions, and you never show up to answer them, we might just take your app off the store, because we really do want to. The communication between users and creators is really what this is all about.
Thanks. And with that, I think that we can open it up.
Okay, thank you, Ingrid. Well, we have a question from Alistair Binney of BMS. Alistair.
Oh, thank you, John. You've unmuted me. Right. So, yeah. So I typed in a couple of questions that were going along. The first one was just in the initial phase one. I haven't looked at the Apple Store or the Android market. How many apps do you expect to include in the first sort of wave of apps that you accept into your phase one?
I would guesstimate. I think the slide 2 or 3 had 30 icons in there. They're all chemistry apps from the iTunes App Store, so I would say at least 30. Let's go with 50 as a wild guesstimate. For the Google version, I'm not sure how many. I would say at least 10. So right now Android is behind, but catching up pretty fast. We'll probably do Windows as well, but I don't know if any are in there.
Right, and what's your sense of the rate of growth? I mean, so if it's 30 to 50 in the sort of first cohort that comes in, are you going to just admit them as they appear on the public markets, or are you going to do it by a kind of cohort model?
It'll basically, people will need to submit an application to us. So we don't have the form written out yet, but it's going to be pretty simple for phase one. And so as people create them, put them on the App Store, they get in touch with us, and we check it out and we list it. So it's hard to predict the future exactly, but I would estimate that the number of apps will probably never go over 1,000. I mean, never is a long time, but it will take a number of years to get to 1,000.
Alex,
100 maybe.
Alex, that reminds me of the chap from IBM who said that the world would only need 20 computers.
Yeah, something like that. So we'll put a time limit on that prediction there.
You're right. Hostage to fortune, yeah.
And then I guess thanks for that, Alex. My other question was about phase two. I wondered what the infrastructure implications are for Pistoia to do the actual hosting, and what would that cost Pistoia or the Pistoia subscribers?
It's really not very expensive. Running the software on a server somewhere, I mean, the amount of it, basically could be done by one computer connected to the internet. It's not a big resource. Actual financial details, I'm not going to go into that, but we expect the cost will be low. And I mentioned also, you may have implicitly asked another question. I mentioned that Pistoia has no interest in bringing in the 30% tax. That doesn't mean Pistoia will never charge anyone any money ever. I mean, we do have to cover the costs, but they will be pretty low.
Right. And I probably should know this, but I don't know. Does Pistoia have a kind of entity outside of its member companies that can host even a single server connect to the internet and manage whatever transactions are required? Is there a like a host place outside of our member companies?
I'm not sure what you mean by outside. I mean, since most servers run in a place that we're not even aware of. So you mean outside of the direct control of Pistoia?
No, I guess what I mean is that so Pistoia, the Pistoia Alliance would be the owner of. I mean, even if the server's on a cloud somewhere, the Pistoia Alliance would be the legal entity that owns that very small piece of infrastructure.
Right. We've actually had some discussion about that as it happens. I think by default the answer is yes, but we reserve the right to make the answer something other than yes. So we could create an intermediate corporation or something, but that kind of detail probably belongs in a different discussion.
Right.
Alistair, thank you very much. Very good questions. Now, we have a question from Chris Southern. Chris, let me unmute you and see if you'd like to fire.
Oh, hi, John.
Yep.
Yeah. Let me try the first round, Alex. Are the apps beginning? Are people designing apps beginning to think about joining them together in the workflow sense, 9 bits and those type of things?
Speaking for myself and the people I collaborate with, the answer is absolutely yes.
Okay.
I can actually send you I think you've probably already read the paper for that. Sean Eakins and I and Tony Williams published about app-to-app communication.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
there are, the caveat is, this relates to phase 3, is that as long as you're working with pretty small documents, so up to about 1 megabyte, you can pass them around between apps, or you can email them to people and unpack them at the other end. You can do all kinds of collaboration things, and it actually works really well. The catch is, of course, when you go to large data, it gets really prohibitively complicated unless you have what we were going to build. Yeah, it is important because apps tend to be small and modular, so they break tasks down into small pieces. That's the way it works, and so integrating apps together and chaining them together in workflows is really crucial, and that's something we're very well aware of.
Good. Okay. If I may, John, ask a second question.
Chris, you always do.
Do I know? No. Anyway.
Yes, you may, but this has to be your last question.
Yes, certainly right. As we all know, certainly historically in bioinformatics, we're faced with the sublime and ridiculous elements of choice in terms of redundancy and actually making task choices very difficult now. And chemoinformatics software is now passing that point as well. It's getting pretty spoiled for choice. Can Pistoia, in a sense, wave a hand across this in the sense that they will select task-orientated? It becomes invidious if you're saying choose the best for the job. But is that the line of thinking you've got back in your mind?
I would suggest that the way this is dealt with is we really plan on doing our best to get people to document their use case stories. So if somebody uses apps A, B, and C to solve problem D, we want to know about that, and we want to make sure that everyone else knows. And if app E was tried but didn't work, or someone else found it was better, we want to hear that too. So the idea, find the prior art, find out what works, try it yourself, and if it doesn't, let the appropriate people know. Tell people that their app was almost perfect for solving this problem, but there was just one little thing that made it all fail, and if you could only fix that, please. This is the kind of discussion that Pistoia wants to foster. I mean, right now, there are apps to do some pretty sophisticated things, but there's just so little communication between the users and the creators that it's really impossible to tell whether people are successfully doing their workflows or not. So yeah, it's a big problem, and that's basically how we want to solve it, just documented examples. And so if somebody writes up a use case that gets discussion and so on, we might just take specific pieces from the forums and write them up and publish them somewhere else in a more concise form. Maybe it's just the Pistoia blog, but if this really works well, we could even write peer-reviewed papers with top 10 workflows for 2013 or something. And there are all kinds of things that we can do to try and enlighten people as to what are good ways to get things done.
Yeah, so, thank you very much. That's good.
Should we play some elevator music while people think about questions? I see something in the chat panel here, John.
Yes, no, I'm sorry. I've just been talking on mute. I do apologise. I was hoping that we would get a question from David Look of Bayer. David, can you hear me?
I can. Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. So if you'd like
yes,
to like to ask your question, David.
Okay. Thank you very much, John. I'm worried a bit about the bias that one application platform might present over the other. Let's say Apple versus Android, or both of them against Windows. Will there be some kind of stimulation for the developers already in phase 1 to develop their application ready for all platforms, or do you suspect that each app developer will favor one platform over another?
I'm pretty sure that we won't be going out of our way to favor any particular platform. I can tell you for sure that developers will choose their favorite, because I'm sure everybody, most of you probably already know that when you build for one platform, you get to share exactly 0 lines of source code with all of the others if it's a native app anyway. So if you want to support the top 3, that's 3 completely different projects that start from scratch, and they will have their subtle differences. So you can't just directly port it either. So most people pick one, and that's their favorite, and they go with it. And the problem is that these are life sciences apps tend to be, not all of them, but they do tend to be fairly complicated. So it's not like just a little Twitter client or something. These are big projects actually, and it's a lot of work that goes into them. So the answer is definitely yes, people do favor it, but it tends to be based on demand, really. I mean, if the customers that you're interested in are mainly using one platform, then that's what you build for. So if one of them sort of drops off the radar for some reason, and life sciences generally decide that they're not interested in using it, I'm pretty sure you'll see that part of the App Store sort of fizzle out a little bit. So we're going to leave this one to the market is the answer to that question.
Yes, I understand. It's like looking into the crystal ball right now. But I'm sure that the discussion forums within phase 1 will help each developer which direction will be more fruitful.
Right, and if every question is when is the platform X version going to be ready, then that'll have a strong impact.
Yes, thank you.
David, thank you very much indeed. And we have a question from Harjeet Virdi of Merck. Harjeet, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me fine?
Yes, very clear. Harjeet, if you'd like to ask your question, please.
Yeah, I wanted to check on the pricing of the apps on the Pistoia Alliance store. Like, who will set the price? Can you talk more about that? And then when the people will, or the scientists will download it, how will that work out? Will it be like all the scientists, like a company-wide download or an individual download?
Okay, so just to be clear, in phase 1, we don't. All we're doing is pointing you off to the main app store. So if it's free or costs something, if you want to, if you get directed to the iTunes app store, you'll do whatever you normally do there. In phase 2, our plan, and this may change according to what we're forced to do or not do, but the plan is basically to not get involved at all in the process of deciding what money changes hands, if any. So two real main scenarios in general, and that so if you submit an app directly to our app store, one option is to make it free, so just let anybody who signs up for our app store and just have access to it and just go for it. And the other option is not free, so the actual vendor will be able to enable or disable people from using it. So if you want to charge a flat fee of $1 per app, basically they get in touch with you and write you a check for $1 and you enable that. Or if you want to work out some other business model like a site-wide license with a support contract and all of that kind of stuff, you negotiate that directly between the vendors and the customers. They work that out, and Pistoia has absolutely nothing to do with that. It's completely hands-off. So whatever you do behind the scenes is your own business, and so then you have, the idea is that you as the vendor will be able to switch it on for everybody in that company or individuals or what have you. And so we don't know exactly how much power we'll have, like whether we'll be able to group people into companies and have you just be able to check one checkbox so that all these people can use it. Those details will come later, but that's the general philosophy that we're going for. So the vendors have control. It's all of the business is done offline. Is the short answer.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Is that clear? Very good. Excellent. So we have a question from John Orn from SAP. John, can you hear? I think we probably can't hear you, I'm afraid. But I believe John's question is, what platforms are being considered for the cloud? Will you build your own data center or use a service such as Amazon, Azure, etc.? I believe that's John Orn's question. If it's not John Orn's question, it is a question.
Right. Yeah, it's a good question too. So we're working with the TM Forum on this one, and if you're not familiar with them, they're a consortium that has a number of vendors that are a part of it. So they include large providers of IT and cloud computing and a number of smaller companies that have their own cloud computing solutions. So one of the members is called Cycle Computing, and they have a platform that is already very well suited for the kinds of things that we're doing. So we're in the process of investigating the use of their software, but they don't actually operate data centers. So we might be using the Amazon cloud or anyone else who wants to play. I mean, it's to be determined. And so the actual, we just need a lot of servers that work well. We have some ideas as to what software we want to put on them, but there may be some bidding involved. So whoever offers us the best deal may end up with that one. But that's in progress. We're working on it, but we're keeping our options pretty open right now.
Thank you, Alex. And I'm afraid I don't think John can. He may be able to hear us, but can't talk to us. Some quirk in the technology there. So there's a question from Jason Victor of Merck. Jason, can you hear?
Yeah, I hear you.
Very good. If you'd like to ask your question, Jason.
Unfortunately, I think there was something that jumped all. Oh, sure. I was curious about how, if Apple was willing to let us do this in this capacity. You mentioned the 30% tax. It was without having to go through their App Store requirements as well. You're talking to your phase 2. Is that something that you expect to see some pushback?
We're curious about that too. So as you may know, Apple instituted an enterprise distribution system. So the idea of this program is that big companies such as your one can build their own private apps and deliver them to their own employees. So it's Pistoia is not a big company like a pharmaceutical company because it doesn't actually really have any employees. So it's a meta organization. So whether that enterprise licensing agreement permits us to deliver a very narrow vertical market with several hundred apps to very specific people, whether that's within the bounds of the contract that Apple has written up. We're not exactly sure, but we're cautiously optimistic that we can do it. But that is a big if. I mean, we would love to be able to go forward with this. We have all of the technology and we have a license that's almost right, if not actually right. And so we really hope that goes down okay. But we're absolutely not going to do anything that gets Apple upset at us. That would be very bad. So we're going to stay away from that. So yeah, cautiously optimistic and so the Android store is no problem at all. That's pretty open for that purpose. And the Windows one is probably similar to Apple, though I haven't looked into that. But it's not really, it hasn't really taken off yet. So we'll deal with that later.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Very good question, extremely pertinent question. And we have a question from Maren Fieger of Waters, if I pronounced your name correctly, Maren. Would you like to ask us your question, please?
Can you hear me?
Yes, very clearly.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, and you did pronounce my name correctly. Thanks very much. I think my question has actually been answered already. I had been wondering, normally on for example, an iPad, you can only install apps that come through the iTunes store. So I know there are other app stores, but you actually have to do something called a jailbreak to your iPad. And I was wondering if you had found a way around that, so you would not have to do that on your
Right.
iPad.
Yeah, and we're definitely not going to have anything to do with jailbreaking. So the enterprise distribution system is a sort of a side door around that, and as I said before, it's designed, I think, for big companies that want to deliver apps to their employees. So they don't want to stick them on the public app store. They don't want other people using them, and other people don't want to use them either. So my understanding is that this agreement resulted from pressure from industry. People really wanted to use their iPads internally, and the iTunes App Store is just not happening for that. So it was do this or we won't buy your stuff. So we have our fingers very tightly crossed that that we can generalize this arrangement to provide apps to the companies, at least the companies that are members of Pistoia. I mean, there may be some strings attached. We'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay, thank you.
Maren, thank you very much indeed. And we have a question from Tony Ewan of Siligence. Tony, can you hear?
Yes, I can hear. Thank you, John. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. If you'd like to ask your question, please.
Okay, so yeah, so basically from your slides, you need the Windows Android store and the Apple. You didn't mention Windows 8 store. Are you going to support that as well?
I guess our plan is only to support the mobile side of that. So I realize the waters get a little bit muddy since they cross over with each other. So we do generally intend to support Windows. The plan is to support mobile devices. So I guess the Surface, if it's running in desktop mode or touch mode, I'm going to have to go with maybe.
Okay.
I don't think there is any technical reason why we can't support it, and the general idea is towards mobile. So if somebody wants us to deploy a large desktop style app through our app store, we're probably not really into that. But if it's a mobile app and it's running on a Windows platform and the technology is already done by AirWatch, who's working on all that for us, then we'll probably go with it.
Yeah. Understand that. So basically, the Windows Surface, it's basically equal to iPad, equal to Android tablets. So in mobile, basically, it's not only phone, small screen, it's also large screen. I really, hope you can support that. So this is my first question. My second question is, for the phase 2, So you said, you said basically you will give more flexibility to the developers, app developers. Are you going to go that way like the Android, so no monitor at all from the store, or go to the Apple Store kind of fit a very restricted rule for people to submit the app? Which way we need to go?
Right. It definitely won't be the sort of free-for-all style with Android. I think they have some retroactive curation, but you can certainly stick whatever you want up there, pretty much. No, we're definitely not going down that Android route, and we will be curating them and making sure that they're appropriate for the domain. So if you want to submit an app that doesn't have an obvious connection to life sciences, that's just sorry, try somewhere else. We're not interested. And when we're actually hosting apps, we will probably don't quote me too heavily on this, but we don't have the resources to extensively test all of the apps in there, so it makes more sense to more check out the actual people who are submitting the apps. So if you're a Pistoia member and in good standing and you're reputable, chances are you're probably not going to install some malware on people's devices, so that will go a long way. So yeah, we will be curating, but I think the style of curating will be quite different from Apple and presumably Windows as well. So if you're running a massive app store that has hundreds of thousands of apps on it, you kind of have to assume that you have to take the position that everybody is trying to do something bad by default and just treat them guilty until proven innocent. In this tiny little small town niche where everybody knows each other, or at least knows someone who knows them, we can be a little bit nicer about that. We can check you out and make sure that you're not up to anything bad. So it'll be a lot more pleasant, I predict.
Okay, got it. Thank you very much.
Tony, thank you for that question. We still have quite a few questions, so let's get to the next one, and it is from Ton Van Dalen. Ton, can you ask your question?
Hi there. Hi there. Yeah. Hi. My question is, can you give some examples of mobile apps that are widely deployed today and are delivering real value to industry? Just curious to hear some examples.
Well, I can certainly describe some of the apps that I've been involved in. For one example would be the ChemSpider mobile app that has more than 10,000 downloads. But as I was saying earlier, we don't. All we know is how many people download or purchase them. So that's really the problem that the App Store is trying to solve. So I can't tell you that it's widely used in solving problems. That's answering that question is part of what this project is all about. There are some other examples like the Spreezy mobile app from Infochem. I mean, that's a very industry-oriented solution. The mobile reagents app has been around for a long time. It's used for looking up chemicals and catalogs, and that's very relevant to users. It has a lot of people using it regularly. So I can't really answer your question because that's, basically I would like an answer to that question too, which is one of the main reasons why I got involved in this project.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Ton. Ian Harrow, I think you have a question for Alex. Ian, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah.
Very
so
good.
I've got a question about user identity. This is one of the key assets that all the current public app stores hold as a crucial asset.
Yeah.
And I suspect, we'd be okay for phase one because we're obviously reusing that. But when it moves to services, whether it's Airwave or hosting in the cloud, are you considering something like ORCID as a kind of independent technology for identifying the users, which isn't dependent on a commercial entity?
I'm not exactly sure, but so as far as we've gotten with this one so far, our thinking is that people will be able to sign up as users of the App Store simply by providing what you've become accustomed to. I'm sure you will have hundreds of logins to sites where you've typed in your name, your email address, and a password, and then clicked on an activation email. So we're thinking of going down that route, but we've got all sorts of other ideas how we can specialize it too. Like
you might want to check out ORCID because its purpose is a public resource for identifying users. And,
okay.
You know, they envisage that every scientist will have an ORC ID.
Right.
And to be used for purposes such as this. So if there's already a solution and standard out there, at least we should know why we're not using it.
Sure, I'll add that to the list.
Worth checking it out. It came online about a month ago. They launched the service. It's ORCID, ORCID.
Thanks. We'll look into that.
Thanks, Ian. And now we have I think a question from Nick Trigg of Constellation Technologies. Nick, I better make sure that you are unmuted, which you are now.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, indeed.
Actually, I had a couple of quick questions. First one was I'm sorry if I missed it, but the timing on this. What's the timing? When does it all kick off or start?
Mid-January for phase 1. We can deliver it pretty soon because it's pretty easy. For phase 2, we're aiming for somewhere in Q2, just to give ourselves a little space. We can, because we definitely know we can launch with the Android one functional while we work on the legal details for the other ones, the other platforms. We just have to get a bit more rigorous about our review process, and that's more or less it. So Q2, fingers crossed, that's less definite. And for phase 3, I wouldn't want to speak out of giving you a timeline for that, but as soon as possible.
That was the cloud one, wasn't it?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, that answers my second question. Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Now, I have a question here, but I'm not sure of the author of the question. But it's so I'll read it out anyhow. So, Alex, what is the main objective here? 1, is it to ensure developer-user interaction? 2, is it to increase app visibility discovery?
It's definitely both of those. So yeah, that summarizes phase 1 very eloquently. So we want people to know where to find the apps that they need for life sciences R&D without going through all 700,000 of them, or for whatever store. And we want to provide a way for people to talk to each other. So that's phase 1. That's right on. And phase 2 is providing a way to deploy apps that's compatible with the business model that's a bit more similar to what you would do with conventional software. So you sign the contract and you send out the CD and they install it, that kind of thing. That's the vertical, a much more vertical friendly business possibility for that.
And then there's a question here about the Apple tax. What is the motivation in reducing the Apple tax 30% question mark?
Well, it's not really a motivation of reducing it. We just don't really have any incentive to recreate it. Pistoia isn't really that keen on taxing business. I mean, it needs to pay for its expenses, but as a charitable, as a non-profit, so it has a mission to make things better, and we think that we can make things better by providing these tools. And these tools don't cost a lot of money to run, luckily. It's one of the great things about this current age of computing. Everything is pretty cheap, except people's time, of course. That's still expensive. We think we can deliver something great, really actually useful, and we can do it with a small budget. So we'll find a way to make sure that it's that we're not hemorrhaging money on it. But there isn't really much reason to go about interjecting ourselves between business. And also it's a hassle. I mean, we just hands off. We don't have to worry about it.
Okay, and then there's another question. If developers want to deploy to enterprises, they would have to go to the enterprise app store anyway? Question mark.
Well, there's I don't think it's you shouldn't use the definite sense there. And you can create your own enterprise app store after getting permission from Apple to do that. So if you already have one, you could upload an app onto it and make it available to people within your company. So we want to add a level of abstraction. So we want to include a number of companies, big and small, the kinds of people who would be inclined to join the Pistoia Alliance primarily. And we would like to include all of them within one enterprise app store. So instead of having a different one for every company, you can participate. And I think in order to have your own enterprise app store, you really do have to be an enterprise. So I mean, if you're just 10 guys in a basement somewhere, I don't think that option is available to you. Whereas if Pistoia's plans go ahead as we hope, then we can include you on that.
Thank you very much. Another question here. We would like to hear a little more about the motivation behind wanting to be an app store as opposed to enhancing discoverability of apps.
Right. Well, in phase one, I guess that it really is what it's doing. It's enhancing discoverability and adding the communication parts that are conspicuously absent from the current tools. But simply the App Store, using a public App Store has some major downsides. It's really not possible to exercise many business models. I mean, first of all, you have to wait for it to be reviewed. You have to make it available for everybody at the same price. You can't negotiate a contract. You can't find out who your customers are. So you can't do things like an annual license, or you can't do support contracts, or unless people actually go out of their way to identify themselves to you, you don't know who they are, and that's just not conducive to building the customer relationship that's really necessary to build software successfully in this vertical market and build a business out of it. So we see that's a need that's just completely non-existent in the current set of options, and we think that we can solve that problem. And just it's historically it makes sense. I mean, the early apps were all very consumer-focused mass market products. I mean, things like games and Twitter clients and PDF readers and just stuff that tended to appeal to pretty much everyone. So that the way that the app stores work right now is very, very compatible with that. But now that it's possible to provide some really, really sophisticated functionality that's only interesting to a few hundred people, and yet extremely valuable to them, the mass market model, it just doesn't work. There's no way to build a business, and there's no way to really improve your products.
Very good. Now, I realize we're running over time, but there is one more question which we have here. Alex, the question is, do you expect participants to help create the App Store, or participants by populating the App Store?
Not entirely sure I understand the question, but I would definitely go with the latter. I mean, we want people to populate the App Store, and the Pistoia core team will make sure the technology is all functional, and we'll be the gatekeepers, albeit nice gatekeepers. But so populating it is creating it in a way, I guess. So in terms of the forums and the interaction, I mean, if people don't show up and discuss what they like and don't like and would like to have, if people don't show up and have these conversations, then the App Store probably won't provide all that much value. So I would call that creating the App Store in a sense. So definitely yes to the second, and I think yes to the first one as well.
Okay, so I think I'll just go to the attendee list. I'll look for any raised hands. Are there any questions unasked that someone would like to ask? There's Keys, would you like to ask a final question? I see your hand raised, but maybe...
Sure, yeah. I input the question, but not sure if it came through. So it seemed to me that the phase 3 has a quite different scope than phase 1 and 2. I guess this was already addressed, but my point is that in phase 3 there are already quite some initiatives dealing with that.
Yes.
Think about Amazon, for example, who has life science data set. Think about Synapse from Sage Bionetworks. Even organizations like EGI, the European Grid Infrastructure, has an AppDB. You have, if it comes to bioinformatics and cheminformatics, you have things like Galaxy, Taverna, and so on. So, as you mentioned, commercial companies like Cycle Computing are offering in this space. What can Pistoia add in that?
Right. Well, actually, we plan on leveraging some of these technologies, well, especially Cycle Computing, who are already involved. So, it's likely we will use Amazon to provide some of our services, and we're certainly interested. Well, that was crazy. We're certainly interested in any other value that Amazon can provide. So we're actually quite inclusive when it comes to this phase 3, at least at the moment, since we're still deciding exactly what's going to go into it. However, the meat of your question, I guess, is why bother when there are other things out there? They're really the idea of phase 3. I haven't gone into a lot of detail on that, so I'll just elaborate a bit. The idea is that we'll be able to assemble a collection of third-party services. So you might have molecular dynamics software from company X, or some fingerprint calculation from company Y. We put all of this cheminformatics and bioinformatics services on a single location, and so apps will be able to, through a common API, apps will be able to pick and choose from all of these installed services. And all of these services will be able to interact with user data, which is also stored on the same cluster. So it's just a matter of getting it all in the same place, making it accessible through one API that apps can use, and people will be able to upload and download the data and share it and hand it over to these services. And so, and all of this, of course, will be thoroughly tested and for robustness and security, of course, and that we have a number of experts who are already in on the conversation to make sure that's all in good hands. And we'll also have be able to implement a billing mechanism. So if you're using a huge pile of data, or you want to run, scale something up to 100 computers for a week or something, we'll be able to track that and bill you, and you'll be able to mix and match all of these different services, and it'll show up on one bill. So there's really no new technology there at all. I mean, this is stuff that people have been, these are hard problems that people have been dealing with successfully for quite a while now. And so it's just a matter of bringing it all together in one place and providing a consistent unified API that's backed by the Pistoia Alliance, which has a good reputation, and making that available to app developers so they can make all of these tools available to their products. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Alex. And I will just offer the floor for one last question, if anyone would like to ask anything. And
this is a buyer from Bayer Healthcare. What about non-R&D but nevertheless relevant apps? I am thinking to things like TIBCO, Spotfire, Tableau software, SharePoint, Excel, these kind of things. Are you planning to add them as well? By the way, I think really great idea. Thank you.
I would go off the cuff. I would say no. These kinds of general purpose software packages. Wait a minute. Are these even apps at all? If we're really only talking about mobile apps on the client side, although in phase 3 we want server-side algorithms as well. Okay, that's cool. Yeah, so server-side we don't have as much motivation to restrict it. I mean, anything that can be part of a pipelining workflow where data goes from one algorithm to another algorithm to another algorithm, anything that fits in there and provides value, we are interested. So yeah, things like statistical analysis packages that have nothing to do with chemistry or biology. If they're useful in some of these back-end pipelining style workflows, then yes, we're absolutely interested.
Okay. Well, if that answers the question, I think at 5:15 we're 15 minutes over time, so I think we should probably draw this webinar to a close. Alex, thank you very much indeed for an extremely interesting presentation and an extremely informative Q&A session. So
And
thanks.
thank you all for the questions. That was great. That's a long list there.
Okay. Well, on that note, I'll say cheerio to all, and thank you very much indeed for your participation.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye now.